Unfortunately, we are fully booked today. Only a suite room is available, but even at a discounted rate for you all.
The young hostess staring at us from head to toe and said this to us with a sarcastic smile. It's clearly she is looking down on us. Then an older man appeared from the back. When I looked up, my wife, Carla, looked anxious. I want to say something, but words are hard to come by in times like these. I've been thinking a bit. I resorted to saying something quite ordinary. Carla, are you okay?
Yes, I'm fine. It's not like I'm the one who's sick.
She looks tired beside hospital bed. She was talking like a child, putting up a brave front. I couldn't bear to see my wife like this and turned my attention to my father-in-law lying in the bed. Just a few hours ago, we received a call that Tom Sullivan fainted due to an illness. It seems his long-standing illness had worsened. Neither my wife nor I were informed about his illness, so it hit us pretty hard. Also, according to the doctor in charge, any treatment will likely not cure him completely. He has been informed of this and understands his condition. So, all we can do for my father-in-law is to watch over him while he receives treatment in his hospital bed. If we had kids, they could have offered some encouragement, I muttered. My wife quietly nodded. We don't have children. I'm already 40 and Carly is 35, so having children now seems challenging. And even if we had kids, we probably couldn't show them to my father-in-law. His condition had deteriorated to that extent. Still, seeing my wife looks depressed, I couldn't stop thinking about if we had a child. Several months later, since the day when I rushed to my father-in-law's hospital room, he passed away. I managed to accept it because he was ill, but what about my wife? He was her beloved father. It can't be easy for her. That was the only thing I was concerned about. I handled various arrangements and paperwork for my late father-in-law on behalf of my grieving wife. I managed everything necessary, including the documents, wake, funeral arrangements, and contacting financial institutions. I needed to inform various parties about his passing, but I left this task to his colleagues. That's because he was a well-known consultant in his industry. I knew he was famous as a consultant for the hospitality industry, but I didn't know the specifics of his relations. He apparently appeared on TV and in magazines, so do I need to contact those places as well? Ultimately, unsure, I decided to ask someone to handle such communications. What I focused most was staying by my wife's side as much as possible. I don't know if I could make Carla feel better even a bit. Nevertheless, I stayed by her side without saying anything. Eventually, the funeral preparations were complete, and many people gathered at the funeral home. First to arrive were our relatives. After them, my father-in-law's neighbors came. I thanked them and listened to their memories of my late father-in-law. Eventually, a couple who run a diner in the neighborhood showed up.
He really helped us out. He was genuinely a good man.
The wife began to reminisce with her warm, narrowed eyes. Listening closely to the stories, it seems that my late father-in-law had given various advice about customer service and interior decoration to the diner's owners. Moreover, it's surprising to hear that, initially, he would offer advice every time he went there to eat without owners asked for advice. He is a professional consultant, but offering advice for free for them. Can you believe such a good deal? Apparently, The diner's couple were skeptical at first, too. However, I think that's one of his good points. Since he was giving advice so passionately, they reluctantly decided to make changes to the customer service and decoration as he suggested. Unbelievably, after it, in the blink of an eye, the diner began to thrive. After that, one after another, the mourners came to pay their respects. At first, it was just close acquaintances, but gradually, celebrities who appeared in various media started to show up here and there. Owners of popular Chinese restaurants, managers of famous hotels, media personnel, people from various industries came to attend. What struck me the most was that everyone attending the funeral praised my late father-in-law. After receiving guidance from Tom, their businesses immediately started flourishing. Their profits doubled. He had helped them. Each of the attendees said such things as they bowed their heads before his memorial. It seems that he liked helping people more than I thought. As I observed the attendees, I found myself feeling a renewed sense of respect for my late father-in-law. Everyone genuinely praised him, and not a single person had a bad word to say about him. I realized once again that my late father-in-law is truly a warm-hearted person. It seemed that Carla felt the same way. At first, Carla looks depressed, but eventually, she was wearing a soft smile. She fondly remembered my late father-in-law and talked about memories of him. And she getting to know aspects about him that even she hadn't known. Even though it was a funeral, there was a certain warmth in the air. By the time the funeral ended, it seemed like Carla had completely regained her spirit. So, I asked her again, "Hey, are you okay now?"
Yeah, I realized again how amazing Dad was. And many people have contacted me and given me their contact information.
I see.
Dad is my pride. I wish I had known more about him sooner.
In the end, several hundred people had attended the funeral. Of course, since he had appeared in the media, I had expected a considerable number of attendees, but this many were beyond my expectations. I felt proud to realize that such an incredible man was my father-in-law, while also being taken aback. Despite unexpected occurrences, the funeral went off without a hitch. With everything safely concluded, I felt a sense of relief. Especially, the best part was that Carla had been deeply distressed, felt proud of her father, and could look forward. Also, it seems that Carla has made many friends and acquaintances through his funeral. My late father-in-law had taken care of many people, and they gave their contact information to Carla. Now that the funeral is over, they are actually meeting and talking with her. In fact, when I come back from work, she told me with her smile, "Today, I met with the owner of the Chinese restaurant my dad used to go to and talk about how was her day." On another day, she cheerfully told me about a conversation she had on the phone with one of Dad's friends. Seeing Carla talk so brightly and cheerfully made me happy as well. I had been worried that she would continue to be depressed and shut herself in. However, those concerns were needless, and I'm sincerely relieved. Eventually, my late father-in-law's first memorial service concluded, and it was becoming quite autumnal. While watching TV on a day off, Carla suddenly said something like this.
"I've been to this hotel before."
On TV, celebrities were introducing a certain hotel. They were using commonplace words, praising the open-air bath and the fantastic view, but based on the visuals, it seemed true. However, there was one thing that piqued my interest. This hotel seems quite upscale. Why did you go there?
I went there because of my dad's work. He took me with him.
And so, my wife, bringing up talk about her father, wouldn't stop talking. She continuously shared memories about what was good about this hotel and how, even though she went with him, her father only talked about work and didn't pay much attention to her. For a while, I was agreeing and indulging in my wife's talk. Finally, when my wife paused, I asked her unexpectedly, "Hey, our anniversary is coming up. How about we go to this hotel?"
Really? I want to go.
"Yeah, it's your memorable hotel, right? It's perfect timing." Saying this, my wife was overjoyed. She was excited and delighted with my suggestion like a child. Seeing her like this, I felt it was worth suggesting, even though it's an upscale hotel. It makes me happy too. Meanwhile, my wife immediately started looking up the hotel on her smartphone. The interior seems to have changed, but apparently, some parts remain still look same in the past.
There might still be people who remember my dad.
Then, you make the reservations. That way, you can talk to the people at the hotel and learn more, right?
That's true.
My wife clapped her hands in joy and started looking up more things. Since it's also our anniversary trip, I want to relax as much as possible. However, during this season, there would be many tourists aiming to see the fall foliage. Maybe we should avoid the peak foliage time, but if we waited too much, it won't feel like an anniversary trip. We want to go on a date as close as possible when it's less crowded. That day, we were excited talking about the trip. The trip was decided to be about a month from that day on a weekday. According to my wife, the weekends and holidays were already fully booked. My wife was disappointed, but it's more convenient for me. I told my wife I'll take paid vacation during the trip, so don't worry. And then, on the day of our anniversary trip, we just arrived and looking up the hotel, I stood frozen in front of it. It was beyond what I had imagined. A luxurious and splendid exterior that anyone would agree is a five-star hotel. Even the guests entering and exiting were of a different class than us. Feeling ashamed for not dressing up more for the trip. However, my wife, unfazed, was casually expressing her impressions like amazing, and as expected, it's wonderful. Soon, my hesitant self was half forced by my wife, who took my hand and said, "Come on, let's go," and brought me to the reception. The inside of the hotel was also more than I had imagined. The unprecedented splendor of the interior and the appearance of the receptionists made my expectations rise even more. If it's this luxurious at the entrance, what about the rooms? My heart was almost jumping out. In contrast, my wife, as usual, was calm and started talking to a maid at the reception. Soon, my wife called me over. "Looks she freaking out?" As I approached, my wife said,
Oh my gosh. They're saying we don't have a reservation.
What? What do you mean?" For a moment, I didn't understand what she's saying, so I asked her one more time. At the reception desk, my wife mentioned the reservation she made over the phone and told them her name. Then, the receptionist immediately checked it, but supposedly, my wife's name wasn't on the list of reservations. Afterward, suggesting there might have been an oversight, they checked again, but still, my wife's name wasn't there. My wife confidently insisted, "That can't be right. It seemed the receptionist was having a hard time. Then, my wife pulled out her smartphone and showed the screen to the receptionist.
Look, the call log is still here. Right.
Seeing this, the receptionist's facial expression changed drastically. Suddenly, they started hurrying, excusing themselves with "Please excuse me for a moment," and swiftly moved to the back of the reception counter, only to return in a rush shortly after.
I'm very sorry. It seems to be our mistake.
The receptionist began explaining the reason why our reservation wasn't recorded. It seems that at this hotel, the recording of reservations made over the phone and the entering of data into the computer are handled separately. Essentially, it seems there is someone in charge of the phone and someone else handling administrative tasks. This system is in place because this hotel usually receives a lot of inquiries and reservation calls, so it's to ensure that calls from guests can get through as easily as possible. And such administrative tasks are mainly the responsibility of the young hostess. But given that she is not good at technical person, errors in computer operation aren't rare. So, the receptionist gathered and checked the discarded reservation tickets, and it seems they found the one from when my wife made a reservation. In other words, it was due to a data entry error. While we were being explained all this, a young hostess in a dress appeared from behind the reception desk. Judging by her appearance, this woman must be the aforementioned young hostess. The young hostess glanced at us and spoke to the receptionist.
What's going on?
Well, we have guests whose reservation couldn't be made due to our mistake.
Oh, I see. So the reservation didn't go through. That's problematic.
I understand her confusion, but the young hostess hasn't greeted us, nor has she introduced herself. Such behavior is rather unbecoming for the hostess of such a respectable hotel. While I was thinking this, the young hostess turned to my wife.
I am truly sorry. We are fully booked today.
But I did make a reservation. This is your mistake, right?
Yes, but as we are fully booked, there are no available rooms. Well, actually, we do have one room available.
Then, she scrutinized my wife and me from head to toe with a rolled her eyes and smirk, and continued in a rather condescending tone.
The only available room is the equivalent to the highest grade suite. There's been a mistake on our end, so we can offer it to you at a reduced price, but I still think it will be expensive for you and...
Indeed, the special room of this hotel looks expensive. But since the reservation was not made due to a mistake on the hotel's part, isn't it only fair they accommodate us there? Yet, the young hostess does nothing but smirk the entire time. In a low voice, she says things like, "I think it's absolutely impossible for the you all, and what will you do today? It seems you've come all the way. Do you want to look for reasonable hotels around here?" Speechless. Is this what they mean? I couldn't even respond. From an outsider's perspective, we indeed might look, we are not rich, being saved money for this trip. But for a high-class hotel's hostess to speak to guests like this, it's shocking, especially as I had high expectations for this hotel. Shortly, my wife whispers to me,
Dad used to say, you can surprisingly tell when guests are unfamiliar with the place. And unfamiliar guests are the same as new guests. Whether you can successfully engage such guests. She really doesn't get it.
Is that so?
Yes, normally, especially with new guests, you would respond more sympathetically in situations like this. But she doesn't seem to get it.
My wife's words carried weight. I could feel she is indeed the daughter of my father-in-law, who had been a consultant in the hospitality industry. While we are having such a conversation, the receptionist seems to be advising the young hostess in a low voice, "You shouldn't talk like that." But the young hostess plays dumb. She doesn't listen to the receptionist. Eventually, the receptionist gives up and starts contacting someone on the counterphone. From this series of events, it seems the problem doesn't lie with the hotel itself. Then the young hostess asks us.
So, what will you do?
Pressed by the young hostess and with me couldn't to say anything, my wife sighs and mutters.
How we've waited patiently, and still, this poor response. You've lost everything.
At my wife's words, the young hostess frowns. Not understanding the words, let alone trying to comprehend them. At that moment, an older man appears from somewhere and approaches us. He turns to the young hostess and says,
"What did you say to our guests?"
No, I didn't.
The young hostess suddenly gets flustered. And she gets sweating, avoiding eye contact. The older man says, "That's enough, please step back," and dismisses the young hostess. Then he bows to us.
"I'm deeply sorry. I heard there was a mistake on our part."
Before he could finish, my wife quietly says, "Ah." Hearing this, the old man also stares intently at my wife's face. Then, hesitantly asks my wife,
"Excuse me, are you the daughter of Mr. Sullivan?"
Yes, you are, Mr. Johnson, right?
"Yes, I'm Johnson. It's been a while. I've been waiting for you. How have you been, Miss Sullivan?"
I'm sorry, I'm married now, and my family name is David.
Saying so, my wife points to me. Then, the man called Mr. Johnson smiles warmly and corrects, "I see, Mrs. David." After that, Johnson apologized to us for the young hostess's poo attitude and for the reservation not being made due to their mistake.
"It was our mistake, and since you're Tom's daughter and her husband, please stay as long as you'd like, 2 or 3 nights."
He starts confirming with the receptionist about available rooms. In the meantime, not fully grasping the situation, I ask my wife about Mr. Johnson. Who is he?
Mr. Johnson is the owner of this hotel.
What?
I met Mr. Johnson a long time ago. I was a kid, but he and Dad were good friends.
Really?
I actually found out Mr. Johnson was the owner when I was looking into the hotel. So when I called to make a reservation, he happened to answer. Besides the reservation, we also indulged in many stories from the past.
Frankly, I was flabbergasted. I was surprised that my wife knew such an impressive person, and that such a person was inviting us to stay as much as we wanted just because we were his daughter and son-in-law. I respected my late father-in-law all over again. Soon, Mr. Johnson, who was talking with the receptionist, returned to us. Then, immediately after arriving in front of us, Mr. Johnson bowed deeply again.
"I am very sorry, but it seems we are fully booked today. However, the special room is available. Why not stay in the special room overseen by Mr. Sullivan?"
Is that okay? I booked a regular room.
"It's fine. It's a great opportunity. Please follow me."
While being guided to the special room, I casually asked my wife, "So, about the supervision by my father-in-law you were talking about?"
Yay, Remember when we were watching TV and I told you that I've been to this hotel before? Actually, I came along when Dad was tasked with overseeing the special room.
We arrived at the special room while talking. It truly was a special room. Comparing it to another hotel, it's easy to understand why the young hostess would call it a top-tier suite. Needless to say, the interior was top-notch, and the view of the garden visible from the large glass windows the moment we entered the room was breathtaking, like looking at a photograph. From the inner room, we could go directly out to the courtyard. The room was spacious, and the atmosphere was very calming. We could stay in this room for free just because my wife is the daughter of my father-in-law. Owner Mr. Johnson was just that grateful to my father-in-law, feeling so much obligation. Initially, my wife also hesitated, but since he couldn't attend the funeral, she was finally persuaded strongly by Mr. Johnson as a last resort. After that, we enjoyed to our heart's content. We also went to the open-air bath, and we explored the courtyard. We went to the buffet-style restaurant together and thoroughly enjoyed our time as a couple. Having so much fun, the bad attitude of the young hostess quickly vanished from our minds. Time flies while spending our time in such a manner. It's check-out day. As we cleaned up our room and headed to the reception, Mr. Johnson was there waiting for us.
There's something I want to talk about. Could you please come to the drawing room?
We were led to the drawing room. Then, immediately, one of the receptionists brought us tea. After the receptionist left the drawing room, Mr. Johnson began to talk.
I am really sorry about that happened when you checked in. I never thought that such an attitude would be taken even towards Mr. Sullivan's daughter.
Please, lift your face.
As my wife interrupts, Mr. Johnson slowly lifts his face. He then began to sporadically explain the situation to us. It seems that in this hotel, Mr. Johnson's wife was originally the hostess. However, as she aged and it became physically straining, she decided to hand over her duties to a younger hostess. The new young hostess is Johnson's daughter-in-law, who initially worked as a maid at this hotel. However, she promoted from a receptionist to a young hostess seemed to have inflated her attitude. She gradually became arrogant, apparently starting to act superior even to other receptionists. Eventually, she started acting superior to guests as well, and there were often complaints from them. Recently, complaints from her fellow receptionists have also increased, and Mr. Johnson was thinking that it was about time to take measures. However, this incident seems to have affected him significantly, and not only Mr. Johnson but also his son seem to be angry. The young hostess is currently subdued and is starting her training as a hostess from scratch. Now, she's working as a background staff, doing the same tasks as new recruits, even voluntarily cleaning. Yet, hearing that she's the wife of his son makes one feel sorry for her. It may not end up in her being fired, but hearing that she's somewhat remorseful is somewhat relieving.
Putting aside the matter of the young hostess, I am truly sorry for I was not being able to attend Mr. Sullivan's funeral. It was our peak season.
It's fine. I could feel how much you haven't forgotten my father, and how much you cared for him.
My wife said this with a gentle smile. My father-in-law and Mr. Johnson met during a time when something like this occurred. It was a time when hospitality was neglected and the number of receptionists who would deal with customers earnestly was decreasing. Even when customers were drifting away and indifferent staff were increasing, only Mr. Johnson seemed to think this couldn't continue. Knowing that my father-in-law was working as a consultant at that time, Mr. Johnson immediately consulted him. Then, he learned the basics of hospitality from my father-in-law and seemed to teach them to all the receptionists and staffs. Moreover, by ensuring strict compliance, they were just beginning to regain their reputation as a luxury hotel. In the end, Mr. Johnson bowed his head many times until we left. And he kept saying, "Thank you." It must be frustrating for my wife, too, that such a loved father-in-law passed away early. When we talk about my father-in-law, there are times when she sheds tears, and I can't think otherwise. But even if one leaves this world, there are people who inherit their thoughts, and I feel their thoughts are widely permeating. My wife said that it makes her happy. Thus, a year passed, and we went to visit my father-in-law's grave. Next to her, I quietly watch my wife. Being with her makes me feel happy this much. Maybe it's because she is your daughter and has inherited your way of life. Reflecting on my days with my wife, I reported such to my father-in-law,